The winter wind howled through the streets of Silver Ridge like a living thing, driving snow before it in stinging sheets that turned the world white. Pearl Weatherby stood in the middle of the town square, her threadbare dress offering no protection against the brutal cold, her substantial body shaking with more than just the freezing temperatures. Around her, a crowd had gathered not to help, but to bear witness to her final humiliation. The property is hereby seized for unpaid debts, Sheriff Lucas Blackwood announced, his voice carrying over the wind. He was a tall man with cold eyes and a cruel mouth, known throughout the territory for his corruption and his willingness to bend the law to serve his own interests. Pearl Weatherby, you are hereby evicted from your late father's home. You have 1 hour to remove any personal possessions, after which the property will be locked and transferred to new ownership. Pearl's father had died 3 weeks ago, leaving her alone at 19 years old with nothing but debt she couldn't pay. She had tried to find work, but in Silver Ridge, a girl who weighed nearly 300 pounds was considered unemployable. The shopkeeper said she'd eat more than she'd earn. The boarding houses said she'd take up too much space. Even the saloons, which employed women no respectable establishment would hire, had turned her away with cruel laughter. "Please," Pearl said, her voice barely audible over the wind, "I have nowhere to go. It's the middle of winter. I'll freeze to death out here." "Should have thought of that before your father gambled away every cent he had," Sheriff Blackwood said without sympathy. "You're not my problem, girl. You want a place to sleep? Find yourself a man willing to take you in, though I can't imagine who'd want something like you." The crowd laughed harsh, ugly laughter that cut deeper than the wind. Pearl had grown up in Silver Ridge, had known these people all her life, and now they stood watching her homelessness and potential death with the same enthusiasm they'd show for a traveling show. "I'll give you $10 for one night," a drunk called out from the crowd. "That's more than you're worth, but I'm feeling generous." More laughter. Pearl felt tears freezing on her cheeks, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of breaking down completely. She held her head high despite the mockery, despite the cold, despite knowing that Sheriff Blackwood was right. She had nowhere to go and no prospects. She would likely freeze to death in the streets before morning. A sound cut through the wind, the jingle of bells on a dog sled. Every head turned to see a massive figure emerging from the blizzard, driving a team of 6 powerful dogs. The sled came to a stop at the edge of the square, and the driver dismounted with the fluid grace of someone completely comfortable in the harsh mountain environment. Stone McKenna was a legend in Silver Ridge, though few people could claim to actually know him. He lived alone in the high country, emerging only a few times a year for supplies. He was enormous, well over 6.5 feet tall, with shoulders like an ox, and a powerfully muscled frame that his heavy furs couldn't conceal. His face was weathered by sun and wind, his dark beard shot through with silver, and his eyes were a pale blue that seemed to see right through a person. Some said he was a former outlaw. Others claimed he was a war hero who had chosen isolation after seeing too much violence. Everyone agreed he was dangerous and best left alone. Stone's gaze swept over the crowd, then fixed on Pearl standing alone in the square. He walked toward her with long, purposeful strides, and the crowd parted before him like water. When he reached Pearl, he looked down at her from his considerable height, his expression unreadable. "You're the Weatherby girl," he said. It wasn't a question. Yes," Pearl stammered through chattering teeth. "Pearl Weatherby." Stone turned to face Sheriff Blackwood. "What's going on here?" "Private matter, McKenna," the sheriff said, though his tone was less confident than it had been. Everyone in Silver Ridge knew better than to cross Stone. "The girl's being evicted for debt, not your concern." "She's standing in a blizzard with nowhere to go," Stone said flatly. "That makes it my concern." He turned back to Pearl. "You got family? Anyone who'll take you in?" Pearl shook her head miserably. "No one. My father was my only family." Stone studied her for a long moment, then made a decision that would change both their lives. He shrugged off his massive buffalo hide coat and wrapped it around Pearl's shoulders. It was so large on her that it dragged on the ground, but it was immediately, blessedly warm. "You're coming with me," he said. Pearl stared at him in shock. "What?" "You belong in my bed, not out here in the streets," Stone said loudly enough for the entire crowd to hear. Then, before anyone could react, he scooped Pearl up in his arms as if she weighed nothing and carried her to his sled. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Sheriff Blackwood stepped forward. "Now hold on, McKenna. You can't just take her." "Watch me," Stone said coldly, settling Pearl onto the sled and wrapping her in blankets and furs until she was cocooned against the cold. "The girl needs shelter, and I'm providing it. You got a problem with that, Sheriff?" The challenge in his voice was unmistakable. Sheriff Blackwood opened his mouth, then closed it again, clearly thinking better of starting a confrontation with Stone McKenna in front of the entire town. "Just make sure you register her properly, if you're taking responsibility for her," he finally said. "Can't have people thinking you kidnapped her." "She's coming willingly," Stone said, looking at Pearl. "Aren't you?" Pearl, still in shock, could only nod. Anything was better than freezing to death in the streets. "Then we're done here," Stone said. He climbed onto the sled behind Pearl, called to his dogs, and they shot forward into the storm, leaving Silver Ridge behind. The journey to Stone's cabin took 3 hours, following trails that would have been invisible to anyone else, but that Stone navigated with ease. Pearl huddled under the furs, still trying to process what had happened. Stone McKenna had taken her, had said she belonged in his bed, was carrying her to his isolated cabin where no one would hear her scream. She should be terrified. Instead, she felt oddly calm. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was the exhaustion of 3 weeks of grief and desperation finally catching up to her. Or maybe it was the gentle way Stone had wrapped her in his coat, the careful way he'd settled her on the sled, that suggested he wasn't the monster she should probably assume he was. The cabin appeared through the snow like something from a dream, a substantial log structure with smoke rising from its stone chimney. Stone pulled the sled to a stop, secured his dogs, then lifted Pearl again and carried her inside. The interior was warm and surprisingly well appointed. A large fireplace dominated one wall, and the furniture, while simple, was well made and comfortable. Stone set Pearl down in a chair near the fire and began removing layers of his own cold weather gear. "You're safe here," he said, his back to her as he hung his coat on a peg. "I'm not going to hurt you or force myself on you. When I said you belong in my bed, I meant you need a warm place to sleep. That's my bed there." He gestured to a door leading to another room. "And you'll sleep in it. I'll sleep out here by the fire." Pearl stared at him. "I don't understand. Why would you do this? You don't even know me." Stone turned to face her, and for the first time she saw something like compassion in his pale eyes. "I know you're 19 years old and orphaned. I know the town was going to let you freeze to death in the streets rather than show you the smallest shred of human decency. I know you're desperate and scared and probably thinking I'm going to turn out to be worse than freezing, but I'm not." He moved closer, kneeling so he was closer to her eye level. "Here's the truth. I've lived alone in these mountains for 10 years. I chose isolation after things I'd rather not talk about. But that doesn't mean I'm willing to watch a young woman die when I have the means to help her. You can stay here as long as you need. There are no expectations, no demands. You'll be safe, fed, and warm. That's all. Do you understand?" Pearl nodded slowly, tears streaming down her face now. "But why? People have been telling me my whole life that I'm worthless, that no one would want me around. Why would you?" "Because people are cruel and stupid," Stone said bluntly. "They judge by appearances instead of character. I don't care about your size, Pearl. I care that you're a human being who needs help. That's enough." Over the following days, Pearl began to understand that Stone had meant exactly what he said. He treated her with unfailing courtesy and respect. He gave her the bedroom while he slept on a pallet by the fire. He cooked meals and made sure she had warm clothes and everything she needed. He never touched her inappropriately, never made crude comments about her body, never gave her any reason to fear him. He also began teaching her practical skills: how to maintain the fire, how to preserve food, how to mend clothes, and manage a wilderness household. Pearl proved to be a quick learner and surprisingly capable once given the chance. Her size, which had always been treated as a liability, turned out to be useful for certain tasks that required strength. One evening, about 2 weeks after Pearl's arrival, as they sat by the fire after dinner, Stone spoke quietly. "I need to tell you something about your father's property." Pearl looked up from the mending she'd been working on. "What about it?" "Your father owned more than just that house," Stone said. "He had water rights to a spring up in the hills, prime water that feeds into Silver Ridge's main supply. Those rights are valuable, worth far more than any debts he owed." Pearl's brow furrowed. "But Sheriff Blackwood never mentioned water rights." "Because he wanted you not to know about them," Stone said grimly. "He's been trying to get control of those rights for years. Your father always refused to sell. When your father died, Blackwood saw an opportunity. If you didn't know about the rights and you had no way to pay the debts, he could seize everything and claim the water rights as part of the property." "But I don't have the documents," Pearl said, her voice rising with distress. "I don't even know where they are." "I do," Stone said. "Your father gave them to me for safekeeping about a year ago. Said he didn't trust them in his house. Didn't trust Blackwood not to find a way to steal them. He asked me to hold on to them until he could figure out what to do. Then he died, and I've been trying to figure out how to get them to you without Blackwood finding out." He pulled a leather folder from a hidden compartment in his desk and handed it to Pearl. "These are yours. Legal documents proving your ownership of water rights worth at least $10,000, maybe more. Enough to pay off any legitimate debts your father had and still have plenty left over to start fresh." Pearl opened the folder with shaking hands and read the documents inside. They were exactly as Stone had described: clear proof of ownership, properly filed and witnessed. Tears began streaming down her face again. Why didn't you just give these to me in town? She asked. Why go through the whole thing of bringing me here? Because if I'd given them to you in town, Blackwood would have found a way to take them from you, Stone said. One way or another, through legal manipulation or outright theft. You needed to be somewhere safe first, somewhere you could think and plan without pressure. Here, you're beyond his reach. And now that you have time to understand what you own, you can decide what you want to do about it. Pearl looked at this man who had rescued her, protected her, given her time and space to heal. What should I do? That's your decision, Stone said. You could sell the rights and use the money to start fresh somewhere else. You could keep them and demand fair payment from the town for water access. You could... He paused, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. You could stay here with me, as a permanent arrangement, not just temporary shelter. Pearl's breath caught. Stay here? With you? I know it's not much, Stone said quickly, and I know I'm not much rough mountain man. Past I don't talk about isolated life. But these past 2 weeks, having you here, it's reminded me what I've been missing. Conversation, companionship, someone to share the work and the quiet. You've brought life to this place, Pearl, and if you're willing, I'd like you to stay. Not as some kind of charity case, but as a partner, an equal. But Pearl gestured helplessly at her body. I'm fat. I'm not pretty. I'm not what any man would choose if he had better options. Stone moved closer, taking her soft hands in his calloused ones. You're what I choose, not because I don't have options, but because in these 2 weeks I've seen your strength, your intelligence, your resilience. You've survived things that would have broken most people. You've adapted to mountain life faster than anyone I've ever seen. And you've treated me with kindness and respect when most people are afraid of me. His pale eyes held hers intently. I don't care about your size, Pearl. I care about who you are, and who you are is someone I want to build a life with if you'll have me. Pearl felt something crack open in her chest, years of shame and rejection finally releasing their grip. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I want to stay. I want to build this life with you. Stone pulled her into his arms, holding her with a gentleness that belied his size and strength. Then that's what we'll do. But first, we need to deal with Blackwood. He's not going to let those water rights go without a fight. The confrontation came sooner than expected. 3 days later, Sheriff Blackwood arrived at Stone's cabin with 2 deputies, all armed and looking determined. "McKenna," Blackwood called from outside, "I know you've got the Weatherby girl in there, and I know you've got documents that rightfully belong to the town. Send them both out, and we can settle this peacefully." Stone opened the door, his rifle held casually but ready. The documents belong to Pearl, not the town, and she's not going anywhere. She's an orphaned girl with no legal guardian, Blackwood said. That makes her a ward of the town, which means I have authority over her property. Actually, Pearl said, stepping into the doorway beside Stone, I'm not a ward of anyone. I'm 19 years old and legally an adult. The water rights are mine, properly documented and filed, and I'm not selling them to you or anyone else. Blackwood's face darkened. You little... Careful, Stone interrupted, his voice dropping to something dangerous. You're on my property now, Blackwood, and I don't take kindly to people threatening my fiancée. The word hung in the cold air. Pearl looked up at Stone in surprise, but he kept his eyes fixed on Blackwood. Fiancé? Blackwood sputtered. You can't be serious. You're going to marry that fat—" He never finished the sentence. Stone's fist connected with Blackwood's jaw, sending the sheriff sprawling in the snow. The two deputies reached for their guns, but Stone's rifle came up faster, trained on them with steady precision. "I suggest you leave," Stone said coldly, "all three of you, and don't come back unless you want to find out how serious I am about protecting what's mine." The deputies helped Blackwood to his feet, and the three men retreated, but not before Blackwood spat blood in the snow and snarled, "This isn't over, McKenna." "Damn right it isn't," Stone agreed, "because Pearl and I are coming to town in the spring to properly register those water rights and make sure everyone knows she's the legal owner. You try any of your tricks, and I'll make sure the territorial judge hears about it. I may live in the mountains, but I still have friends in high places from my army days. Don't test me." After they left, Pearl turned to Stone with wide eyes. "Fiancé? Did you mean that?" Stone set down his rifle and cupped her face gently. "I meant it. I know we haven't talked about marriage explicitly, but, Pearl, I want you to stay not just as a guest or a partner, but as my wife, if you'll have me." "Yes," Pearl said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you. But, Stone, you need to understand something. I love you, not just because you rescued me or because I'm grateful. I love you because of who you are, your kindness, your strength, your willingness to see me as valuable when no one else did. I want to be your wife in every way." Stone's harsh features softened into something approaching tenderness. "I love you too, Pearl. You've brought light and warmth and purpose back into my life. You belong here with me, in my home, in my life. And yes," his voice grew husky, "in my bed, if you're willing." That night they came together as husband and wife in truth, if not yet in law, their love-making tender and passionate and healing for both of them. Stone was gentle with Pearl's inexperience and insecurity about her body, showing her with touch and whispered words that he found her beautiful and desirable exactly as she was. And Pearl, for the first time in her life, felt genuinely wanted and valued, not despite her size, but as a complete person worthy of love. They married properly in the spring, with a handful of trusted neighbors as witnesses. Pearl wore a dress Stone had commissioned from a talented seamstress, made to fit her perfectly and in a beautiful blue that brought out her eyes. When Stone slipped the ring onto her finger and spoke his vows with conviction and love, Pearl felt the last remnants of shame fall away. She was loved, she was valued, she belonged. The water rights became a source of steady income as Pearl negotiated fair rates with Silver Ridge and other nearby settlements. Sheriff Blackwood, facing pressure from the territorial judge Stone had contacted, eventually left the territory in disgrace. And Stone and Pearl built a life together that was exactly what both had needed: partnership based on mutual respect, love that saw past surface judgments to the truth beneath, and a home filled with warmth and purpose. Years later, when travelers asked about the legendary mountain man and his beloved wife, people would tell the story of how Stone McKenna had emerged from a blizzard and declared that Pearl Weatherby belonged in his bed, not in the streets. What had seemed like a scandalous proclamation had actually been a promise that she deserved warmth, safety, dignity, and love. And Stone had spent the rest of his life making sure she had all of those things and more. Pearl would sometimes think about that terrible day in Silver Ridge, standing in the snow with nowhere to go and no hope left. She would remember the mockery, the cruelty, the certainty that she was going to die alone and unmourned. And then she would look at her husband, at the home they had built together, at the life they shared, and she would marvel at how the worst moment of her life had led to the best chapter of her story. Because Stone had been right all along. She did belong in his bed, not as some desperate act of charity, but as his equal partner, his beloved wife, his chosen companion. And in claiming that belonging, in insisting on her right to dignity and love despite what the world said about her worth, Pearl had found not just survival, but true happiness. The mountain man and the girl nobody wanted had built something that would endure, a love based on seeing and being seen truly, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection, and a home where both could finally, completely belong.